What is up, NBA Draft Heads? It is Alex West, host of the Red Team Draft Podcast, and I have a confession I have to make. We recorded a fantastic podcast with Mike Gribanov from the Stepien and from Hardwood Homies, joining the entire group last night, but we lost it due to some technological snafus. We re-recorded today, but schedules were a little bit different, so this episode's broken up into two parts. We start with Mike and I sitting down to do a little bit interview about Zion Williamson, and then after that we bring in Connor Eustachio and Josh to talk about Zion. And this is a series that we're going to keep doing, hopefully a little more together and cohesive than what we had to do today. But we're going to start into the 2019 draft class and really start breaking down the prospects and comparing players against other players in this draft class. But we started with Zion because he is so unique and so incredible. We decided we were going to break him out. So we're going to start with Mike, and then we'll join the guys later on. Enjoy the show. I'm joined by our guest today, Mike Gribanov of the Stepien and of Hardwood Homies podcast. Mike, how are you, man?
Oh, I'm doing good. Doing well. Ready to talk some Zion.
Ready to talk some Zion again because we have tried this before, do some technical snafus, but we're back. So let's break down Zion Williamson. I mean, that's where we wanted to get started, so let's go ahead and jump right in. Mike, I think we have to start with his physical tools. I think that is where the discussion begins and ends. When people watch him play in college, when they see these highlight dunks, these highlight reel blocks, these steals, what he can push out in transition at his size, I think his tools are the focus of discussion. So give me your breakdown on Zion's physical tools.
Yeah, for sure. Well, obviously, he's like one of the great vertical leaping prospects that we've had, at least since I've been doing this in the past few years. And just the combination of that, the strength, super powerful frame. I believe you guys are going to talk about on this episode the ratings you guys have. We talked about it yesterday a little bit when we tried to record the first time. So yeah, like the ratings you guys had for him, like leaping, he was like a 10 out of 10, and the frame was 9.8 out of 10. So like, obviously those two things are like, he's again one of the better prospects we had. At least since I've been doing this, and probably going to be already in the NBA, one of the better guys in those things. Also very quick, able to get low to the ground at his frame and size. You don't usually see guys with that type of frame, be able to handle and change direction, execute sort of like in and out, quick dribbles, I don't want to get too much into the handling, we'll get to that, but, just have that game, the athletic ability and the fluidity and the quickness to, execute those types of ball handling moves and stuff like that. So, just that combination is like the main part of his game and really his biggest strength as a prospect, and really what makes him this outlier prospect is just overall his physical profile. The second jumping Connor talked about yesterday, on the rebounding and being able to sort of be guys for boards and all that. So just the whole package really, as far as physical tools outside, maybe you could say length. His wingspan isn't huge, and then sometimes like against like water bug quicker point guards, he won't be able to really stay in front of them that well. Just with his how thick he is, it's kind of hard to turn that quick against like the really fast guys. But even against those guys, he's able to slide at least a little bit, and I think his lateral agility this year has been better than expected. So definitely a big strength for him there.
Mike, what do you think about? I think there's some legitimate concern for a guy who weighs 280 pounds. I think there's some legitimate concerns about, is he too big? I don't think he's going to drop from 1 to 3 or anything ridiculous because of his weight. But I think in a sport that prioritizes being able to jump 2 times, this quickness, this recovery, and puts so much pressure on the joints of your hips, your hamstrings, your knees, your ankles, those kinds of things. Is there any concern at Zion size that if he gets an injury, it may nag him or anything like that? Do you see anything about his frame that's sort of negative in that regard?
Yeah, the medical part of basketball is definitely not my expertise. I'm not a doctor or anything, but you definitely would think that somebody who's just that big and that explosive and plays with that reckless abandon a lot of the times, and so much of his game depends on being an explosive finisher and using his body and making these quick twitch changes of direction, whether that's sweeping or moving horizontally or whatever. So yeah, definitely there's some concern with that in combination with his weight. And we've seen in the past in the high school in AAU, he hasn't had like any big like ACL surgeries or anything like that, but he's had some nagging injuries here and there and has missed some time in his final 2 high school seasons, which usually at that age, guys, it's a little bit less common for guys to miss time for injuries. So, the fact that it did happen to him, there's some concern. And of course, during the McDonald's game, I believe he hurt his thumb. So that's not like maybe a little bit of a freak injury more so, but still, another injury there. So yeah, definitely some concerns there. And then even with the weight, the other concern would be is just, cutting the weight, getting in better shape and conditioning. I don't know if this is conditioning and kind of stamina is something that you guys have in this section, but yeah, that's definitely like been a big weakness for him, is just being able to play at 100% motor and stay on the floor for big minutes, kind of taking possessions off, in particular in the defensive end at times, just due to conditioning stamina issues. So from that sense, you kind of want to see him lose weight as well. But at the same time, I'm sorry to keep going along here, but
no, please.
I think in a way you could kind of spin it as a positive, the weight, because considering how young he is and all the upside and potential he already has, the fact that if he loses this weight, there's even further potential for upside, and perhaps he'll be able to make movements and kind of plays that he's not really able to make now, and kind of add things that other players may not be able to add because they're already in great shape, or they're not, they don't have kind of that ability to lose weight like he does, and potentially add something. So there's some upside, there's some upside there that most prospects don't have potentially. So you could kind of spin it in a positive way in that sense. But yeah, definitely some potential downfalls there as well for him. I agree.
Let's move on and talk about his intelligence. He's been so impressive as he hits the ball ahead in transition, and he reads defenses pretty well. What have you seen in terms of his intelligence that makes you happy about what he's going to bring to the next level? And then are there any concerns in this area? I have seen a few. One of the things that I've noticed, he's a little bit charge prone, and I think he kind of makes some decisions a little bit too late, and because he's so big, he kind of gets caught in that no man's land. Is there anything that you see like that on either side?
Yeah, no, I think he's that's another thing that, again, one of the reasons he's by far the number 1 pick, and we're so high on him, and so many people are so high on him, is a lot of these guys that are going to be these physical tools freaks kind of guys, freaky athletes or whatever. Like there's a guy, the LSU Marlon Taylor, for example, who has like a 45-inch vertical or something like that. But a lot of those players are very raw skill-wise and very raw as far as basketball IQ and basketball instincts and kind of anticipation and things like that. But for Zion, he's actually a very capable passer, and we saw the game. I would just watch the game yesterday, Wake Forest, where he had 5 assists in the first half, I believe. And when there's an open guy, he's gonna find them. He could, make a variety of different passes, could swing it to the wing side, could run a pick and roll, could pass out of the post, recognizes double teams well. And then also on the defensive end is a pretty smart player as well, making rotations, recognizing kind of where guys are going to on the opposing team, and cutting off plays, kind of making it tougher for opposing teams to execute, getting in the passing lanes. Very capable shot blocker with that explosive athleticism, of course, but also the positioning and, again, anticipation and instincts to kind of be in position and be able to actually execute those blocks. So yeah, I think the IQ is pretty impressive considering his physical tools and all that. So yeah, I think that's a pretty fairly big strength for him, but definitely some freshman mistakes as far as just lack of awareness, kind of spacing out, ball watching at times. You talked about the charges. I think there's some concern there, but I think with that's just more a product of his game and the lack of shooting and the teams kind of playing off of him and kind of forcing him to drive into the paint and, being ready, packing the paint on him and stuff like that. I mean, yeah, definitely he could do a better job of recognizing that and kicking it out. But I think he's done a fairly good job as opposed to other like high usage freshmen. A lot of even on his team, RJ Barrett, will kind of make some questionable drives where he'll also get called for charge calls or put up a really contested shot. But Zion, a lot of times when he doesn't have a driving lane or he doesn't, he's not able to beat his defender, he'll kick it out. He's not particularly selfish, like I talked about the passing and stuff like that. I think it's just more to me a product of the lack of jump shooting, which allows the teams to pack the paint on him, which kind of sometimes will lead to charges, I think. But yeah, definitely could get better as far as balance and recognizing those situations to some extent.
And I think, I mean, and you said this, a lot of the concerns that I said, particularly about his charges, maybe getting blinders on as he goes down the lane, a lot of those things are just youth. I mean, this is a young kid who has come into college. He didn't play in one of these high-level programs. He played at Spartanburg Day in upstate South Carolina. He wasn't playing against the biggest and best players in high school, and so he handled the ball a lot. He was on ball, being the primary handler, being the primary creator, being the primary everything for his team. And so I think that maybe it's just experience is what I'm seeing in terms of like him missing reads and sometimes, missing kickouts and those kinds of things. And particularly with the charges, that's going to improve over time. I haven't seen any really concerns in this area. And I'm kind of with you, like, what I have seen has been impressive. His ability to assess the defense, particularly in transition, has been really, really impressive to me because he uses his immense physical skills and his speed to push the ball up the floor off defensive rebounds, which I think is a very underrated trait for guys who might play a 4 or 5 at the NBA level. And when he does that, he manages to just kind of get ahead. And I really like that stuff. So let's go on and talk about his defense. I mean, I don't think there are a ton of concerns about his basketball IQ. Let's go on and talk about his defense because I think there are some really, really impressive things. And then I think there are some areas where I'm a little less impressed, but I'm interested to hear what your take is, Mike.
Yeah, I think overall it's the instincts have been very impressive. And like I knew he had pretty good instincts when I watched him in AAU in high school and stuff. And, obviously the athletic ability and stuff, but I didn't like this part of this game, like kind of he's played even above my expectations. I talked about like the lateral agility has been better than I expected. He's been able to switch on wings fairly competently. And, against like smaller, quicker guards, they'll probably beat him, but he'll at least slide him for a couple slides, a couple dribbles. So that way, the big man, his help, Zion's help, will be able to at least come over and kind of contest the layup if he does get beat. And but also his just the combination of blocks and steals from a statistical perspective is absolutely ridiculous. Right now he has, I just checked, 31 blocks and 31 steals and 26 blocks, and he's not even halfway through the season, so he's easily on pace for over 50 steals and 50 blocks. And the only freshman to ever do that, well, not ever to do that, and since Sports Reference has it since like 92 93 I believe, is Shane Battier, Anthony Davis, Kevin Durant, and Nerlens Noel. So he's pretty much in like company of these great prospects, first of all, but also some of the elite freshman defenders that we've seen in the NCAA in the last few decades, from a statistical perspective at least. So definitely very impressive in that sense. But at the same time, this kind of, to me, goes back mostly to the conditioning and kind of to his motor at times being hit and miss, and Duke just being so dominant. And even if they're not blowing teams out, they're kind of able to churn it on at any moment and beat a team easily. Like even if it's close at the end, they'll just kind of churn it on and win the game anyway. I guess it didn't work out for them in the Gonzaga game, but otherwise. So Zion kind of has been like part of that mentality. They say the team takes on the mentality of their best player. So yeah, Zion kind of will, on the defensive end, you can kind of see when they're up or when they're doing well, and he doesn't feel like they're in danger of losing or anything like that. He'll kind of take a lot of plays off and kind of lose focus and lose interest, you could say, I guess, on the defensive end. So Yeah, that's definitely something that's been an issue for him. Like, especially in the Maui tournament, there's if you watch, I believe in the Auburn game, there's a lot of in the Gonzaga game as well. There's a lot of closeouts that he should have been a part of, and he should have contested a shot, but he kind of just hangs out in the paint. And even in last night's game against Jalen Horde, a very good off-ball player and cutter, but Zion several plays where he got back cut and kind of spaced out and just allowed Horde to get behind him for like a lay-in or an opportunity at least for a lay-in. So yeah, definitely something that's an issue from that sense. Just focus and effort, and those things are definitely fixable. But I don't think they're also as easily fixable as some people may think. It's not just something that you could so easily turn on. And most players that don't have motor at this stage of their career, usually it's not something that you just magically improve upon. I think it's a big part of my evaluation for players in general, and it's definitely one of the things that's kind of a weakness for Zion to some extent. But as far as his defense overall, I've definitely been impressed. Obviously, I talked about the statistics and the instincts as a team defender, and being a little bit better on ball than even I expected.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, creating extra possessions is one of my favorite things on defense. Zion has been summarily impressive in being able to get steals, be able to keep the ball in bounds on blocks, being able to, push ahead off misses. He does a lot of things on the defense that convert to extra possessions for Duke, and I think that's really impressive. But you hit on my major concern is that he kind of gets caught ball watching sometimes, and I think you hit a really interesting point because I don't think we know what happens at the next level because, like you said, this is not something that comes and goes at guys this age. They kind of are who they are. Now, I kind of think, Mike, and maybe, we disagree on this. I kind of think that the excellence of Duke has backed Zion's defense off a little bit. They're just really good, and he doesn't try because of that. I don't know that means he will try later, but I do think a lot of times, like you said, like by the middle of the second half, they have the game in hand, and you see a lot more possessions where he just kind of lackadaisical. But let me ask you this question, following up on defense, just really quickly, because NBA, NCAA, very, very different systematically when it comes to defense. Duke runs a lot of zone. In the NBA, you're not going to see a lot of zone. How many positions do you think Zion can guard in a vacuum, not specific guys, but, do you see him having the capability to guard a Joel Embiid where he's given up 6 inches? Do you see him having the capability to guard perimeter players? Where does his not just switchability, but where does his defensive matchups kind of lie for you, Mike?
Well, I think 3 and the 4 would be his ideal guarding positions. I think, I'm not like huge on, kind of throwing it to even somebody as good as Embiid in the post and
Sure.
just trying to run your offense like that, even if he has a little bit of a mismatch like Zion. Like if he has like little Isaiah Thomas in the post, of course you'll throw it to him. But like against Zion, yeah, that would be a little bit of a mismatch. I think Zion would have some issues, but also it's not something where I would at least want to base my whole offense around trying to get Zion switched onto Joel Embiid and just dumping it into Embiid over and over and like thinking that's going to be super efficient. I think and then I think it might even work out for Zion's team because just post play 1-on-1 is just unless you get like that early position where you just seal a guy off and get an easy dunker layup, like actually like posting up and taking a few dribbles and then like going to like an 8-foot hook. That's not a particularly efficient type of offense. So I do think you'll be able to guard fives for the most part. I mean, again, it depends on your definition, how comfortable you are with everything. And then a lot of twos, I think you'll do well with, like, except like maybe like the really quick and skilled guys like a James Harden you probably not want to put Zion on him, but like more like average two guard. I don't know. Let me think. Like I don't know. Chris Middleton, I guess, is more of a 3, but like who would like count Bazemore or somebody like that. Bazemore is fairly quick, but at the same time, I think Zion would do a fine job there, especially if you're not having Zion on him full time and just kind of switching on him in the intermediate possessions here and there. So yeah, I think 2 through 4, 2 through 5, he would do more or less fine, and 3 and 4, the forward positions would be, of course, ideal. And the point guards, he could I think like in hard hedge trap schemes, he would do fine, like sliding for a couple dribbles. He's fine. But then after that, if it's like a quicker point guard, like a Fox or a Russell Westbrook, they'll probably beat him off the dribble. But by that time, hopefully you could get like your big to rotate over and kind of help, or like one of your other guys to kind of rotate over and help or whatever. So yeah, that's kind of my opinion of his on-ball switchability.
Awesome. I mean, that's similar to what I thought too. Let's go on and talk about his offense for a little bit. Obviously, he has been on Sports Center every single night. We've seen the points. We've seen all the things that he can do. But I think that there's a lot of ability. Zion has a lot of ability on the ball, that he can do a lot of things that aren't necessarily scoring. But I also think there is this huge concern about his shooting mechanics, about just the way he moves his body and his hips and his shoulders and all these things. So let's get into his offense and give me the pros and the cons.
Yeah, sure. Well, his offense, I think number one thing is just his ability to finish at the rim. I mentioned this yesterday, but in NCAA this year, the only player who has a higher usage than Zion and has a higher percentage of their shot attempts be at the rim, so more of their shot attempts at the rim out of all of their shot attempts, is Ethan Happ, a big man who's very, very skilled, great footwork and stuff.
Very similar draft outlook, right?
Yeah, sure. Happ is a good player, but yeah, no, I mean he's much different than Zion in the other categories, but just in their shot profile, they're similar. But the point is, it's not that they're similar. The point is that Happ is the only player in the NCAA who finishes at the rim at such a high rate that Zion does. And obviously Zion is a lot more efficient. Happ is only shooting like 55% or 60% at the rim right now, and Zion is like at 77%. So yeah, it's pretty impressive, his combination of volume and efficiency at the rim. And I think if you go through the history in the NBA, a lot of the top players, even in the last few years, one thing that maybe gets a little bit underrated that really makes guys stand out and reach that precipice of being one of the 3-5 best players in the league is that combination of efficiency and volume at the rim. Guys like Dwayne Wade, LeBron James, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Kevin Durant, even Blake Griffin, and so forth. Have all been some of the leaders in the NBA in the amount of makes they had and the shooting percentage they had on at the rim shots. Just that ability to get there, and when you're there to actually finish, because obviously you would say, oh, layup, it's an easy shot, but a lot of guys, there's a big difference between shooting 60% at the rim and then shooting 75, 80%. Zion is at 77, like I said. So yeah, I think that's kind of like his big strength, and just his dominance as far as strength. And watching him, for example, in the Indiana game, there was a play where Justin Smith, I believe it was, who's actually a very good athlete as well, has like a 40-inch vertical, I believe, reported, and he was like all going hard trying to box out Zion, and Zion was just kind of standing there, not even really trying. And then once the ball went up, Zion just explodes, goes right over Smith, grabs the ball, takes one dribble, and just dunks on him. And I was watching that, and I just started cracking up. And I don't remember like seeing something like that when a guy's just that dominant, when he doesn't even care and just dunks on everybody. The last I could remember that when it's just like laughably dominant is watching Shaq back in his MVP year in 2000 when I was a kid, and when he'd have these just dunks where it didn't even seem like he really even was cared or tried, and he would just turn around and dunk it on Cherokee Parks' head or somebody like that and have 60 points, 20 rebounds in a game. Of course, Shaq was doing this in the NBA, and Zion is in college right now, so it's a little bit different, I'm not saying. And they have a lot of differences as players. Shaq is much taller, but just something we brought up yesterday, and Eustachio had some good points about this. He'll probably add on here when you guys do that part of the podcast. But yeah, just the way how dominant and strong he is kind of reminds me of Shaq to some extent with that finishing ability at the rim. But yeah, and then of course we talked about the passing. Has pretty good vision, not selfish, unselfish. You definitely want him to become an even better passer and really learn some of the reads. Like last night. Again, he had several assists in the first half, but he ran a pick and roll, for example, and he did a fairly good job as far as the handle and the timing and everything like that. But at the end, then he kind of passed it off to Marcus Bolden on the baseline, and Bolden had no space, and ended up kind of turning it over out of bounds. And if you look at that play, he had RG Barrett, Zion did wide open on the weak side corner for a three. So yeah, kind of missed that read. Still kind of needs to learn some of the reads. You talked about him driving in and getting called for charges. So making reads off the dribble in that sense as well. So definitely if he improves his passing to become one of the better passers and be like at the level of like kind of like a point guard almost as a playmaker for teammates, that would be a big thing for his game and could really help him reach his upside. But he is at least a good passer, at least an above average passer already. But the big weakness on offense is, of course, his shooting. The shot mechanics extremely questionable, really flat arc. Results to this stage, obviously made 3 3-pointers last night, but overall still not good results. Really not comfortable unless he has a lot of space and kind of lines up his body sideways to the basket or kind of weird. Kicking out his feet and stuff like that. And I will say to some extent, I think he has a little bit of touch and AAU on like 14-foot jumpers off the dribble. He showed some good touch and stuff like that. And his free throw percentage is above 70, which is pretty solid for a freshman his age. Is not bad. So there's some hope, I think, for him to at least, I think he'll probably be a better shooter than Ben Simmons, who's a total non-shooter at this point, and I think could be a similar level shooter to like Giannis or somebody like that. At the very least, maybe even better. So it's not all bad, but it's definitely not good, and it's definitely one of his big weaknesses, and it'll definitely be interesting to see how that works out against NBA defenders who are so much bigger, more athletic, smarter, more well-prepared to guarding guys like that who are kind of non-shooters and going under screens and kind of forcing them to become shooters, and not allowing them to get in the lane. So that's definitely a concern for his game to some extent.
All right, before I let you go, just quickly, I had a couple of questions from the guys. Josh wanted me to ask you, what role do you think will suit Zion in the best in the NBA? Does he show enough on-ball ability at a moderate percentage of his NBA minutes to operate on ball, allowing for more spacing elsewhere, like Giannis, Ben Simmons, even Justice Winslow, since Goran Dragic went down? Do you see him as a potentially on-ball player at the next level?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the upside and that's the hope is, you're drafting him number one. You're hoping he's kind of, again, that mix of like Ben Simmons and Shaq and Giannis all in kind of in one kind of smaller, I guess, because he's only about 6'6" player. But, that's kind of, that role that LeBron has played. Obviously I'm not saying he's going to be the next LeBron necessarily, although I am very high on Zion's upside potentially. His kind of tail end of his upside I think is very high, but yeah, I think that's kind of like the role. Again, I think a lot of those guys kind of, there's a misconception that those guys are like these great half-court scorers necessarily, or like one-on-one, self-creators, but that's not really true. If you look at like the isolation and pick and roll ball handler scoring numbers on Synergy or NBA.com, LeBron is not up there. Even in his best seasons, he's not going to be one of the top guys. It's like guys like Curry or James Harden or Lillard that are going to be, or like Lou Williams even is a great half-court scorer. But LeBron kind of more scores in the flow of the game and transition a lot, off putbacks. He does score in ISO and pick and roll, of course. course, but that's not like his primary effect on the game, even if you're just looking at the offensive end of the floor. And I think Zion could definitely have a similar kind of shot profile where he could, attack a little bit out of pick and roll, a little bit out of the mid or high post, attack out of ISO, hit the boards. Connor brought up some great points about him using him as a roll man. I think that's going to be something that's very effective considering his explosive ability as a finisher at the rim, but also ability to handle out of the short roll and find guys kind of then, hopefully I think at the very least, maybe his shot never develops into him being a great pull-up shooter, but I think as a pick and pop guy, if you leave him open, I think he'll make a decent at least amount of jumpers there and so on and so forth. So that's kind of the hope for him, definitely for his upside. I guess the downside, if things really, go off the rails and it doesn't work out, then he would be more kind of a limited, kind of a small ball five, off ball guy, kind of, again, going back to that roll man role. That would be kind of his main thing, and his usage would probably be a lot lower, and it would make building a team around him a little bit tough. So there is some concern for downside there, but the upside is definitely, you hope that he becomes that primary initiator type.
All right, well, last question before I let you go, and this is a tough one. Estacio sprung this on us yesterday when we recorded the podcast the first time, and it'll be a little bit less of a surprise this time. But if the 2019 draft board had Zion Williamson, Luka Doncic, and Jaren Jackson Jr., how would you order those three guys on your personal big board?
Yeah, I've thought about this question before, so it was a little bit easier for me, I guess. And this is the answer I would have given yesterday if the technical difficulties didn't pop up, unfortunately. Anyway, so yeah, I think Doncic and Zion are essentially tied for me. Like, they're different as prospects, but overall, I'd say it really depends on team fit. But because Doncic kind of fits for more teams in the NBA as it currently is, I guess I'd give him the edge for number one. But I'd say Zion is a really close number two. And by the end of this college season, if Zion continues to play similar to the way he's had, at this rate, I think I might even put him number one above Zion by June. So, above Doncic by June. But it's really close between those two. I think Jaren, I love Jaren, and he's great. It's still close, but I think he's a little bit below for me, below those two at third. But yeah, he's definitely a great prospect, and I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up the best one out of the three. But I just think Zion has so much upside. I just don't think Doncic and Jaren Jackson, I think they have like a realistic upside to be like top 15, top 20 players in the NBA, but I think Zion has a realistic upside to be a top 5 player. I think he also has a lot more downside than those two guys, because those guys already, like, you see him in the NBA and how good they are, it's unlikely they're gonna like bust or fail. And I think there's still some chance of Zion at least to, like, being totally not good, or the injuries we talked about, and etc. But just I think upside is so important in the draft, and getting that top 3, top 5 guy, the chance to have that is just so important in the way the NBA is and the way basketball is as a sport, that you kind of have to put that above all else almost. So that's why I think Zion is. I'm a little bit, I think, higher on Zion than you guys seem to be in your answers.
Mike, I appreciate you coming on, man. I appreciate you coming on twice, and even though our listeners are only going to get to hear you once, I really do appreciate you taking the time out of 2 days to come and help us out. Get your plugs in for anything you're working on. I mean, you just released a big board. You on Hardwood Homies, a great draft podcast that I highly, highly recommend. What are you working on that we need to keep an eye out for?
I'm not working on anything, to be honest, right now. Like, I'm just watching a bunch of basketball. We'll see what comes up. But yeah, I guess check out my podcast with Jackson. I really appreciate you guys having me on. I wish Connor, Estacio, and Josh were all here as well. But yeah, unfortunately, I'm sorry about, I don't have a computer right now, so I'm like going through my phone and it's doing all this stuff. But yeah, it's great to be on, and anytime you guys want me on, I'm happy to oblige if I'm able to. So yeah, thank you for having me on.
Yeah, man, and this will not be the last time we have you, especially if we can get your computer situation worked out. This will definitely not be the last time we have you. So, Mike, appreciate it, man. We'll talk to you soon, okay?
Have a good one later.
Well, we just heard all from Mike Gribanov, and Mike, thanks again for coming on, man. We really appreciate it. And now I'm joined by the rest of the team, starting with Mr. Connor Har, the prodigy. Follow him on Twitter at HarConnor. Connor, what's up, man?
Nothing much. Long day, ready for take two.
Yeah, take two. It's unfortunate. Sometimes it just gets the better of us. But it joined, as always, of course, by Mr. Josh Earl. Follow him at 2RedJEarl on Twitter. Josh, how are you?
Doing good. Excited for take two up to the streets or whatever the hell we're calling this.
Ooh, take two up to the streets. Isn't that Bring It On?
Probably.
Okay. All right. Great radio. And last but not least, the executive producer, Mr. Estaquio Raleigh. Estaquio, how are you?
I'm doing good. My Cavs lost their 10th in a row, and my Syracuse Orange won tonight, so I consider both of those positives.
And you can follow Estaquio on Twitter at EVR1022. Now, you heard at the beginning of the podcast, we talked about Zion Williamson with Mike, and Mike gave us some great points. We're going to go into a little bit more depth in terms of our scouting scores. That's something we're really particular about this year. We have a scoring system that we call a starting five, and we talked about it with Mike with tools, intelligence, defense, on-ball and off-ball offense, as well as hustle. And Estaquio is going to break down the scores, but we're also going to talk about all those things. And we started with Mike on tools, and guys, I really think this is where it is, because this is where you see the most of Zion Williamson. So, Estaquio, you want to give us the breakdown on what the tool grades are as well as what Zion's scores are?
Yeah, so the way our grading system works, we're grading on a 1 to 10 scale, with 1 being a replacement level NBA player and 10 being an MVP caliber player. And now when we're doing this with individual skills, it doesn't necessarily mean that player is an MVP if they get a 10, but for, say, ball handling, we think of Kyrie Irving as a 10. And so that gives you a feel for how these grades work. Now, in the tools category, we have 5 items underneath that category: speed, which is all north-south movement, burst, acceleration; agility, which is east-west movement, side-to-side, lateral agility; leaping ability, body control, and frame. So those 5 categories, and these are the grades for Zion within those categories. Speed is an 8.3, agility a 7.3, leaping perfect 10, body control 7.8, and frame almost perfect, a 9.8.
Yeah, I mean, you look at those scores, Estaquio, and you really see the picture of Zion Williamson. He's explosive. I mean, you can say the word explosive 100 times, but this guy really brings a total package. But guys, I got to put this question out here, and I mean, I want to hear from you guys about this. Is like, okay, you've got a guy who's this explosive leaper who can jump off 2 feet, who can elevate a second time as quickly as most people can elevate the first time. But at the same time, you have a player who is 6'6". So looking at these physical tools, do you see a fit in the NBA that makes sense to you? Or is this going to be a little bit of a new wave where Zion sort of cuts his own path because he is so unique? I mean, Josh, I want to start with you on this one and see what you think.
I think that with his explosiveness and his frame, just his really wide frame, he's built like a brick S house. I think he'll be very easily capable of playing a 4 or a 5 role on a team, depending on who's around him. I mean, Charles Barkley was 6'4" and was the round mound rebound, Hall of Famer, played power forward his entire career. Chuck Hayes was 6'6", center, fantastic defensive player, lacked a lot of the mobility and explosiveness that Zion has. So if Chuck Hayes could do it, like, why can't Zion?
I think he makes some good points, Josh. He's really sort of a unique type of player that we haven't seen in a long time, but that frame will give him some unique advantages against the players he'll be matched up against. He'll be quicker than most of the 4s and 5s that are in the league right now. But I think teams have to try to defend him with those players because he would simply overpower smaller guys. What do you think, Connor?
Yeah, I think that you kind of hit the nail on the head. I wanted to talk about his speed too, where that allows him to sort of play more of a perimeter style compared with his other offensive skills that we'll get into later. But I think that he's really almost a 3. He could play a 3, but he's probably best suited as a 4. And he does have that strength to be able to guard 5s. But I think ideally, you want him as a more perimeter-oriented 4, where you could take advantage of that strength and size and athletic tools that he has.
I don't know. This is weird. Like maybe I'm feeling this out too much, but I'm not sure how I feel about Zion guarding bigger players. I mean, he's big, he's stout, he's great, but like he doesn't look like a super positive wingspan guy. He's 6'6", he's explosive, but I think there's a certain breed of guys in the league right now that guys like Joel Embiid, like DeAndre Ayton, who are really big, gifted, graceful guys for their size. And I think it's a little bit difficult to imagine a scenario where you want to start Zion Williamson against them. Sure, you can run him, in lineups here and there, but I can't imagine a scenario where I want to see my star player in Zion Williamson take the wear and tear of guarding centers on a nightly basis. And you look around the league, and even guys who aren't that big, there's just guys who are going to wear you down. Garden Clint Capella, Garden Steven Adams. There's just a bunch of guys that I don't necessarily know that I want Zion guarding night to night. And so to me, it's like I'd rather he guard fours and probably even threes before I'd let him guard fives, at least to start with.
On the other hand, I think even though you may not want him starting on players like that, those bigger guys tend to wear down as the game goes along. And so having Zion finishing games at the 5, once those guys are a little bit more tired, they've been out there for a long shift, I think that might be a really effective tactical weapon against these guys that aren't able to keep up with him as far as quickness and agility in the first place. And then once they're tired, I think he could really take it to them.
Yeah, but see, here's the thing. His stamina is actually a really big question right now. He hasn't been able to finish games. He takes a lot of plays off on defense, particularly, sort of in the middle parts of the game. I think that's a legitimate question. Now, fixable 100%, but I think that, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to see me wanting to go down the stretch like that. And with what is today, the 9th of January of 2019, Zion Williamson. Now, a year from now, yeah, that may well be true, and you certainly want to work towards that. But I think his stamina, his ability to stay in games, stay engaged, and play with fatigue is a pretty serious question for a guy his size.
I think that's a very valid concern. You see him play, and I don't think he averages 30 minutes a game, and you see him come out frequently for someone who's effective as he is on the court. To me, that really hurts him too, because I think he really has a lot of value in transition that we'll get into later. But being able to take that constant up-tempo flow of an NBA game and even a more up-tempo style for an NBA team that would help him maximize his talents isn't something that could be achievable if he doesn't improve his conditioning.
I guess this kind of just to underlie my own point or to kind of walk it back, like Wendell Carter only played 26 minutes a game last year. So, the difference in the way a guy takes care of his body from eating cafeteria food on campus and staying up late versus having a nutritionist and a built-in strength and conditioning coach and plan for every day as a professional athlete is monumental. And that can't be understated, that once he hits the league, or probably once April comes around, as these Duke guys tend to do, he will be out of school. He will be working with trainers and, moving forward with his professional athletic career. And we can see a tremendous change in Zion. And I think that starts first and foremost with his weight. I can't imagine he's going to play at 280.
No, I doubt it. I think that he's definitely going to try to shed a lot of weight if he's wise, probably like 10, 15 pounds. But I think that he's so strong that he can play at that weight. And it's probably more effective when he does play at that weight. But it's just a matter of getting him in there. And I wouldn't say that conditioning is the biggest concern, but it's just something to throw out there and something that's noteworthy.
Let's go on and talk about his intelligence a little bit. Stockier, you want to break down the scores for us?
Yeah, so we grade intelligence in 5 areas: court awareness, like vision on offense and being aware of where defenders are on defense; situational awareness, knowing the score, the time on the clock, shot clock, your matchups, things like that; decision making, the choices you make on the court; decisiveness, how quickly you react on the court; and then anticipation, seeing things before they happen. So in these 5 categories, Zion grades as a 6.5 in court awareness, 5.3 in situational awareness, 6.0 in decision making, 6.8 in decisiveness, and a 6.0 in anticipation. And I think Mike hit on some really good points earlier about how he plays intelligently, more so than many of the freak athletes we see. Sometimes they're really raw in college because they rely just on athleticism, but he's more advanced than that in the intelligence category. He plays the game in a smart manner. And one thing that I wanted to hit on a little bit was just these flashes of anticipation we see from him from time to time. That really excites me because of the intersection of that anticipation with the physical tools he has. Because when he sees something before it happens, he's able to not just do something about it, but to completely blow plays up. Especially on defense, I think this is noteworthy. He's able to get to his spots so quickly, and he's so explosive. He's such a wide frame that he can make a huge impact when he does see things before they happen. So I think this anticipation could be something that allows him to make a lot of high impact plays as his career progresses. On the other hand, there are some concerns with him in this category. So what thoughts did you have on that, Josh?
I mean, Mike kind of touched on this a little bit. He falls prey to some of the similar issues that you see with most freshmen. He can lose focus. Not necessarily an issue with his awareness per se or his intelligence, but more a case of kind of getting caught watching the ball when he's defending off ball. Luckily for him, he's so damn explosive that even if he's out of position from watching the on-ball action, he's usually able to still contest or close out, and usually actually generates impact plays via blocks or steals out of these scenarios. So it hasn't really hurt him yet, and it probably won't hurt him on the college level, but it is something that you want to see kind of tightened up on the NBA level, because on the NBA level, you're going against bigger, faster, stronger, smarter, better trained, and better coached players. So NBA players are going to take advantage of that kind of dips in focus than college players are.
I think something we have to keep in mind here too, though, is just how young Zion is. He's going to be 19.0 years old on draft day. Now, to give some context, probably the average freshman would be about 19 and a half on draft day. Some guys last year were 19.8, 0.9. I think Bamba was a little bit over 20 years old on draft day, despite being a freshman. So he's at the younger end of the range of his draft class. So there are definitely areas where he can improve as far as being aware, his reaction to things, his consistency of focus. But at the same time, it's expected for a younger player to be a little bit behind the curve as far as experience and being able to recognize things at that young age.
I want to say just something else real quick that just popped in my head that sort of came in a factor of this, and it will we can segue into the defense after if Alex doesn't really have anything to say, but specifically talking about how you guys brought up his anticipation skills so much on defense. I think that's something that's very interesting, because when you watched him in high school, he didn't play at the most elite high school, and he played the typical high school 5-star recruit over 6'5", just standing in front of the rim and sort of being the de facto rim protector. And that's usually where they don't get the development that they need on the defensive end, and particularly making rotations on the perimeter and stuff. So I think that him being able to show that, knowing the role that he played at his high school, I didn't really watch a lot of his AAU, but at his high school playing that, I think that that's a major positive for him to be able to do that and almost sort of either know it already or learn on the fly in his freshman year.
The the thing I have to say is I think there's something interesting left in the schedule. First of all, I want to say that I am actually super bummed that Reddish and Barrett and Williamson all went to the same college, because I think there's a lot to be learned when you see somebody sort of hoist the mantle on their own, as a lot of college players do. They tend to be, one, maybe two NBA players. There could be 4 first round picks on Duke. So they sort of all share the mantle of the damn man, as people would say, but he has people to help him. And I think that takes away from what we can find out about his intelligence, because his situational awareness is going to be what it is. But at the end of the games, you really kind of start to learn who somebody is. It's like playing pickup with somebody. At the end of a close game, you really start to find out who a player wants to be when the chips are down. And with so many guys on this roster, I'm not sure that we're going to get to find out that about Zion Williamson. And had he gone to Clemson, or had somebody gone somewhere else and there weren't as many horses in that stable, it might have been something we're going to find out. Now, that being said, I do think we're going to find out something at tournament time, when he starts to see some defenses get mixed up, starts to see some different looks thrown his way. So I do think there's still some things that we can learn about his IQ before his college season is over. But unfortunately, I just don't think there's a lot. Now, let's transition, as Connor said, into his defense and talk about that. Eustachio?
So his defense grades, these are pretty straightforward, so I'm just going to go through them. We have him graded as a 7.3 in on-ball defense, a 6.5 in off-ball defense, and that's guarding his man away from the ball, but not including help and recovery, which is the next category. He grades as a 7.3 in help and recovery. Switching, we have him graded as a 7.8, and then impact plays, things like blocks and altering shots, deflections, steals, and maybe making a player pick up their dribble in the lane. Things like that, we have him graded as an 8.5. As Mike noted earlier, he's one of just 4 or 5 freshmen on pace to have 50 steals and 50 blocks in the season. So this is something he really stands out in. So you had some thoughts on his positioning and such, Connor. What did you want to say about his defense?
Yeah, so to me, and this kind of ties in with the IQ thing too, and the anticipation and reaction time and stuff like that off ball. But Duke, to me, plays a very different scheme than you'll see a lot of teams play in college, where they do a lot of ball denial, and a lot more than most teams, even when you're not necessarily just one pass away, like typical help side principles will say. So I think that him being able to react, especially on the weak side, from almost close to denying his man and not in the proper position, even though that seems to be schematical and is not his fault. And I'm not saying it's bad either, but it makes him look even better as a prospect, because it makes it shows how much ground he can cover in such a little bit of time, with his speed and burst and his jumping ability to block shots on the weak side and stuff like that. And I think that translates really well into weak side rim protection at the next level, where you see a lot of weak side rim protectors have that knack to be able to react at the last second, because they have to bait the offensive player into taking his shot, or else he'll find an open man at the next level. So I think that's something that's really interesting to see from Zion, and probably not something that we would see if it wasn't up to like the team perspective.
Just a follow-up question on that. How much do you think his stature could limit him as a weak side rim protector? Do you think his height could, and his shorter arms could limit his impact in that regard, Connor?
Yeah, I think that's probably correct. I think as far as challenging shots with verticality, yes, but I think that if he is still able to bump you with how strong he is for like a guard or somebody like that, it can really throw off a shot if he just gets into them a little bit. And then also his leaping ability. I mean, he has the ability to block shots off his leaping ability, even without great length.
Honestly, it's about getting there, not necessarily how he gets there. Given how explosive he is as a leaper, and given his instincts, I think he'd be fine as a weak side rim protector. I don't think he'd be Dikembe Mutombo or anything, but he'd definitely be more than useful in that area, I think.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I talked a little bit about his anticipation earlier, and something that struck me in the games I've watched is that when he sees something coming on defense, he's able to get to his spot so quickly, and then oftentimes he doesn't even have to put his arms up or jump. Him standing there with that rock solid frame completely blows up the play, whether it be a post player going into the move and turning into him, or a player driving the lane that sees this rock in front of them and has to bail out and throw a wild pass. Just his presence has such an imposing effect that even though doesn't have the best vertical reach on the ground, he's still able to make a big impact in ending a lot of plays.
All right, let's go on and talk about his offense a little bit. Now, we break offense down into two categories. We have on-ball offense and off-ball offense. So, Eustachio, do you want to give our scores for Zion in these categories?
In our on-ball offense, the categories are pretty straightforward, so I'll go right through them. Ball handling is a 7.0, passing 7.0 as well. Shooting off the dribble, 2.0, not a highlight. Finishing off the dribble, however, an 8.3, really good score there. And then finishing in the post, we have him graded as a 6.8. And then on off-ball offense, we have him graded 5.0 on movement, 7.3 as a screener. Shooting off the catch, 2.8. Shooting off movement, 1.8. Again, shooting not a strength. And then finishing off movement, an 8.3. And so how do you think his usage and role at Duke impacts his game on offense, Alex?
Yeah, this is a bit of a concern for me. I have not loved how Duke has utilized their players, and Josh put it so excellently in chat yesterday that NCAA coaches aren't trying to maximize their players in NBA systems. They're trying to win games. They're trying to get more recruits. They're trying to do all these things. But ultimately, we saw it a little bit last year with Wendell Carter and with Marvin Bagley. We're seeing it again this year. Everybody doesn't seem to be in what is their best position at an NBA level. And that's a little bit of my concern with Zion is we haven't seen him screen a lot. To me, ultimately, he's going to be an amazing pick and roll man. He has 3 possessions as a roll man right now in Synergy. And I think that's going to be an area you see him shine. And then on the flip side of that, he's also only got 12 possessions as a pick and roll ball handler. Now, that's something that's going to be a major facet of the NBA game. And I think that's part of what NBA teams are salivating to get a look at is how can we use Zion as both a screener or, even some Spain pick and roll actions where you're doing a little screen the screener stuff and use his huge frame, use his quick feet, and use his vertical gravity. And we just haven't seen any of that at Duke. And to me, that's a big area, big mystery, because I frankly believe he'll be very good at it. But, based on all the other things that sort of go around that, the way he moves his feet, the way he reacts to the game, the way he can slide and contain dribble penetration. But ultimately, we have not seen him play that role as side pick and roll screener and how he rolls and how he takes a tag and can he keep it without taking a charge, because people sliding over and taking charges out of that tag roll is something that you see prevalently in the NBA. And so I just have some questions, not about Zion's skill, just how much teams are confident in something that they have not been able to see pretty much at all this year.
So as far as the roll man goes, to me, I think that's pretty projectable, because anytime you see Zion finishing at his best, it's off of considerable momentum, whether that's off the dribble or running a lane in transition. And I think that will still project well and be one of his most valuable traits at the next level as a role man that can provide vertical spacing for a team. What I also think, though, is you brought up a really interesting point where, he can attack off the dribble in the half court. And when he does have a tendency to draw charges in those limited possessions that we've seen. And it seems to me that he's not a fantastic decelerator. which I'm not sure. I think that brings up the question of how he does work when he is tagged on a pick and roll and stuff like that, because that's something that you're going to have to either be able to decelerate with, or maybe even with him just try to finish over the guy and hope that he doesn't get there in time. But I think that that's really an interesting point, is how he could potentially be sort of at risk of drawing a lot of charges as a roll man. But at the same time, I mean, just Zion rolling to the rim in himself is going to add so much value and put so much attention onto the defense that I don't think there's any way that he doesn't have a lot of value in that role in the future.
I do think that you're going to see a lot of teams try to defend his downhill momentum differently than different than what you've seen, because like you said, there's a substantial amount of force. I mean, mass times acceleration. He's big and he's fast, and he moves downhill and he kind of gets blinders on. And I think you're going to see some teams sort of work at scheming a little bit differently. Now, I don't know, like Josh said, he said that his back was sore, like he took a Zion Williamson charge. I don't know how many guys are going to be looking to slide in front of 285 pounds moving downhill, but I certainly think that as early as his first few NBA games, we are going to get a sense of maybe they're going to defend this guy a little bit differently and make him do some things that he does not want to do to beat you. And I think that's where you really start to learn who a player is, when you take away the things that he does best and you make him go to that second level of skills.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, what Zion's plan B is, sort of when teams really game plan around him. And we know it's not shooting. Josh, you had some thoughts on that. You want to go into that?
Yeah, so normally watching Zion is a lot of fun. It's exciting. There's a lot of high impact events, whether they be blocks, steals, thunderous dunks, quick spin moves, just very explosive.
People taking charges.
Stuff. People like turning into a mist of gore, trying to take a charge from Zion with momentum. All of these are really great until he takes a shot. Then I actually not enjoy it very much. The problem with his mechanics is it's not some relatively simple fix. There were one or two shots of his out of the entire sample of shots he's taken that his feet, his hips, and his shoulders were actually squared to the basket. Most of the time, they're all either parallel to the basket or pointed at the baseline, but not the basket. And that introduces all sorts of torsion into the mechanics, which is not good. And then on top of it, he has what I call acute elbow angle. In other terms, he's a forehead shooter. The ball kind of comes from his forehead. And on top of it, his extension is this very stiff, jerky motion. It's not like a smooth shot release like you would expect. It's more like a catapult type action. And, any one of those things, maybe the odds of him getting to NBA average or better might still be okay. The combination of those, I would be very hard pressed if I were in a front office to bet much on him becoming even an NBA average shooter. But that said, and I think Eustachio's got great points on this, it's probably likely that this shooting issue won't actually be that big of an issue for Zion on the NBA level.
That was a great breakdown of his shooting form, Josh. Appreciate that. Yeah, he shows some touch maybe inside of 15 feet, but the mechanical issues really make it a long shot for him to extend his range beyond the NBA arc, 23 feet 9 inches. So I don't foresee that becoming something that he can really use in the future. However, I think the question of will he shoot kind of misses the point of what Zion's identity is. Now, if Shaquille O'Neal was a prospect today and he came into the NBA, would we ask, what if he doesn't shoot? No, that's not who Shaq is. He's an elite finisher around the rim. You would use him as such. He's a physical outlier. Now, Shaq and Zion are very different players, but they're both extreme physical outliers that were elite at finishing around the rim. And I think the focus in how Zion will be used has to put that first and foremost. What I'm excited about with Zion, we talked about how he can be used as the roll man in the pick and roll, but I think we can see the makings of a pick and roll ball handler skill set as well. In isolation this year, he has scored 1.48 points per possession as a pick and roll ball handler, 1.42 points per possession. These are elite numbers. It's a very small sample, but 90% of the time he's getting to the rim out of these actions. His burst is just too much for defenders to cope with. And so having that weapon that can play both sides of the pick and roll, it's unique, and it's puts a lot of stress on the defense. You think of guys in the NBA that can do that right now. Guys like LeBron can act as the screener or the ball handler. Giannis can do that. Ben Simmons can do that. And it poses unique problems for defenders. And his finishing at the rim off the dribble is as good or even a little bit better than his finishing off the catch sometimes. So I think you really have to focus on who Zion is as a basketball player. Now, the shooting, it'd be nice if he had it, sure, but it's not critical to his success. What's going to make or break him is how good he is at getting to the rim off the dribble, and how well he develops as a screen setter and a roller.
Just to add one final thing on that topic, as bad as I think his shooting mechanics are, I think it might actually play into his strengths on the NBA level, because a lot of teams are going to try to play off of him and try to dare him to take those jumpers. But really that'd be playing into his hands, because it allows him to build up more momentum. And good luck stopping that freight train at 285 barreling down the lane at you because you think you're going to trick him into taking a jumper.
Yeah, he has 13.8 attempts at the rim per 75 possessions this year. He's finishing those at 78%. That's an insane number. Most players are around 60%, and he's probably 3 times average volume at 78%. Incredible.
I would just like to weigh in on one thing that doesn't have anything to do with Zion Williamson, but I just want to call out that you said that LeBron James can be the screener, but I just wanted you to know that doesn't mean he has been the screener at any time recently. And I know as a Cavs fan, you may not want to hear that, but LeBron plays pretty dominantly on the ball. I went to the numbers really quickly while you're talking. Out of some 700 odd possessions, he has 17 possessions as the roll man on PNR. So let's downplay how much LeBron can be is the roll man. He can be it. Let's downplay how much he is the roll man.
Hey, he does it in the playoffs when they need him to.
I knew that was going to push a button. All right, let's move on to the last category. We want to talk about his hustle plays and his stock. Going to break it down for us.
Okay, so hustle plays. We have 5 categories here. First is motor. We have him graded as a 7.8. Offensive rebounding, 8.0. Defensive rebounding, 7.3. Transition offense, 8.8. And transition defense, 8.0. And I think this is another area that really sets Zion apart. He has these incredible physical tools, and these areas are one of the better applications of those tools, really crashing the glass hard on offense. And on defense, he's just so big and strong that if he has position, you aren't moving him. So he gets a lot of defensive rebounds naturally, and because of his skill set, he's able to just grab the rebound and go and transition immediately, start the fast break himself. And we've seen how valuable that can be in the NBA recently, like Draymond Green doing that or Russell Westbrook doing that. And it can really put a lot of stress on the transition defense. And that combined with his ability the other direction, not only does he crash the offensive glass, which slows down a transition attack, but he gets back in transition, and he's had some incredible blocks in transition this year. Just the ability for him to elevate. He has shorter arms, and he's only 6'6", but in transition that doesn't matter because timing isn't as critical. The pace is so quick that it's easy for him to time his leap and meet the ball at his apex. And he just has demolished some people in transition this year. I think he has potential to be a high impact player, both directions in transition in the NBA, maybe even one of the best in both directions.
I think it's no secret that I really like create extra creative possessions. And I think Zion does a tremendous job on this right now. If you're going by his counting stats, he is averaging 3.6 offensive rebounds, 2.2 assists, and 1.9 blocks per game. That's 7.7 additional creative possessions, and Duke has the 9th fastest pace in the league right now at 75.4 possessions per game, and so adding 7 extra possessions is a full 10% of their offense is being created by Zion that didn't exist otherwise. And when you look at numbers like that and you see a guy who can do that on a nightly basis in so many different ways, I think that's huge. And his hustle stats maybe don't correct. He's got great hustle numbers, so it's not like he's down on it, but I think I'm even a little bit higher than what our average is because how much value I place on creating those extra possessions. Now, the opposite thing to that is turnovers, and he's turning the ball over about 2.4 times per game, which is a number, so it kind of evens out a little bit. He's only creating 5 possessions when you look at it that way. But I think as he learns to handle the ball better, as he learns to limit his turnovers as he ages, the other tools that he brings to the table with his offensive rebounding, with his steals, with his blocks, is going to be a huge, huge facet of what he can bring to the table that maybe I'm going out on a limb and it's January and I'm saying this too soon, but there aren't many guys in this class who can create as many extra possessions as Zion does. And I think that's a huge, huge plus for his hustle numbers.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct. I think that even when we're not specifically just talking about transition, one thing that Zion really does well is get putbacks. I don't have the exact stats on it, but that's a credit to his second jump leafing explosion and also instincts playing the ball off the rim, and he really thrives in that area as an offensive rebounder. And then in transition as well, you see his hustle running the lanes and being able to finish when running the lanes is just so deadly, like we talked about with his momentum, finishing off momentum. But I think that being able, like you said, being able to create extra possessions is huge, and that's something that Zion does a really good job of on both ends of the floor.
He's 14 for 18 on 30 possessions. On 21 possessions. So he's got 3 turnovers in there on offensive rebounds. So those are the numbers you're talking about. And that's in the 95th percentile among NCAA players. But, very, very efficient in helping his team get extra looks. All right, we're almost out of time. But before we finish everything up, Eustachio, you have a couple of quick hits for us.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about his outlook a little bit. In this draft class, there's not really anyone to compare Zion with. He's the clear number 1 pick, I think, for all of us in this class. But I wanted to talk about how we rank him as a prospect relative to some other guys that are very high-level prospects, young players in the NBA right now. If you look at his production, he's so unique. Per 75 possessions for all of these numbers, he's scoring 31.3 points, grabbing 14.2 rebounds, 3.5 assists, 3.3 steals, 2.8 blocks. These are just incredible numbers. There's a stat called DRE, which is basically a version of game score, but with good math. We used it in our draft guide last year. For DeAndre Ayton's 10 best games of the year last year, his DRE was 18.3. If you take all of Zion's games this year, 18.8. His normal game is better than one of Ayton's best games. It's incredible the numbers he's putting up. And so to help us bottom line this a little bit, I wanted to throw this question to the group. How would each of you rank Zion Williamson, Luka Doncic and Jaren Jackson Jr. moving forward, and why would you rank them that way? Let's go to Alex first.
This is a tough one. I'm going to pick Luka first. I think that here's the thing. I think that you're looking at elite players. Jaren Jackson's the potential to be an elite defensive player. Luka Doncic has the potential to be an elite offensive player. We're not quite sure where Zion falls in that right now. But I think the difference for me is that Luka Doncic, I think, has historic potential as an offensive dynamo, as a guy who can run the offense, be a shooter, be a primary on-ball scorer, create for teammates, facilitate a very, very elite level offense. And with the way that the league's moving right now, as much as I value length, defense, all these things, I think I want to find a guy who can run an elite level offense. And, maybe my defense is going to suffer a little bit, and ultimately that might cost me. But being able to get points down the stretch is so, so important in this league, and being able to shoot off of step backs, which is something that Luka has shown an ability to do over and over, is so, so important. So I would put Luka number 1. I would put Jaren Jackson number 2, and I put Zion number 3. And of course, I'm not going to really fight on any of those in any of those spots, because this would be a tremendous problem to have if you're a general manager.
Great stuff, Alex. So all close, but Zion 1, Jaren 2, and Zion 3rd. Or
Luka 1. Yeah.
I can talk sometimes. Yeah. So let's throw it to Josh next. Let's see what you think.
Thank you so much for this wonderful question, Eustachio.
It was even better the first time when I sprung it on him as a surprise, but then we lost the audio on that. I was so disappointed.
Yeah. I love this question so much. You can hear it in my voice. Honestly, the answer is any of them you'd love to take. For me, all my scouting is through the prism of lineup creation and lineup maximization. So to me, there are more trade-offs both with Luka and Zion than Jaren. And to me, I think it's harder to find a legitimate defensive linchpin who can essentially quarterback your defense, protect the rim, switch on the perimeter, and provide offensive contributions beyond just finishing at the rim. I mean, Jaren can space. He's shown an ability to attack closeouts and in face-ups. Personally, I think from a lineup maximization standpoint, Jaren's got the least knocks on him compared to the other two, not to take anything away from those guys. Then I'd have to agree with Alex that what Luka brings to the table from an offensive creation standpoint is so valuable. And Zion, while potentially capable of being an on-ball creator himself on the NBA level, that's a little less certain than Luka, even last year before getting into the NBA. So I'd have to put Luka second and Zion third.
Okay, great stuff, Josh. So Jaren Jackson first. He really fits in with your elevate team building style. So that makes a lot of sense. And then Luka second, Zion third. Let's throw it to you, Connor, next.
All right. I think I'm actually going to go in the same order as Alex. Specifically, I think that you almost have to take Luka 1, but like I said, you don't want to fight too hard on any of them because they're all great prospects. But I think I'd rather have the guy that could be the primary creator within my offense and shoot so well off the dribble and be able to create space and make tough shots, but also have a guy that can work well off ball, which is one of the things that we loved watching Luka do when he played at Real Madrid, was how well he got his points within the flow of a team style offense. So I think having both off ball and on ball equity offensively, and so much equity in both areas, just takes him to a whole another level compared to the other two. The other two are still very close, and I think I would have to go with Jaren Jackson Jr. just because, to me, Jaren Jackson Jr. is and everybody said it, but to me, Jaren Jackson Jr. is the ultimate NBA defender. I mean, he's a rim protector. He's switchable. He can chase guys off screens. I mean, he really just stands out in every area defensively, and he makes a team defensive so much better. And that's really what I'm going to value with him. And he still has off ball equity on offense, but not as much on ball. Yeah, so his awareness defensively and his switchability is just so valued, and to me, that's what every NBA team wants to go for, is his level of switchability. And then with Zion, I'd have to put him at 3, even though he does have both great off ball and pretty good on ball value if that part of his game develops, and is a decently switchable defender, but not quite as much as Jaren Jackson. I think that he just sort of reaches an intersection where he has more offensive potential than Jaren Jackson does, but he doesn't have nearly as much defensive potential or even the defensive floor that Jaren Jackson has, in my opinion. So that's why I'd put Jaren Jackson over Zion.
Great points, Connor. So you had Luka first, Jaren Jackson second, and then Zion third. So, and just to recap, Mike earlier in the interview said that he would put Luka first by a hair, then Zion second, and Jackson third. I'm going to offer a little bit different perspective on this. And I'll grant that Luka and Jaren Jackson are safer. They've proven their value in the NBA already. And I'll also grant that Luka has more offensive potential than Zion Williamson. Jaren has more defensive potential than Zion Williamson. But I don't think either of them have the potential to elevate both units of simultaneously, nor do they have his value in transition. I think Zion has the potential to impact the game in just about every facet, offensively, defensively, and in transition both directions. And I think that makes him really unique. Not as safe as those two, but I think if he hits his upside, he could be just an incredible force that changes the way the game is played in every facet. And that uniqueness pushes him to number 1 for me. I'm going to go with Jaren Jackson second, actually. I like defense, and he fits seamlessly into an offense as well. So I'll take him second and put Luka last, actually, although he's incredible, and I love all 3 of these prospects.
It's a tough question to have, certainly. Guys, that's unfortunately all the time we have. We had to do this in parts. It was more fun when we had Mike with us, but that's how things go sometimes. But we have reached the part of the season where we're going to be doing this little by little. We're going to start going through these people, and we haven't quite hammered down the schedule yet, so I don't want to say who we're going to do next week. But the point of that is to stay tuned. So we're going to keep going through the 2019 class, and we finally arrived at that part of the year. So I'd like to thank all 3 of you guys for joining me. It's always a pleasure to get to sit in the chair and do the show with you. Make sure you follow these guys on Twitter. You can follow me at AlexWestNBA. You can follow Connor at HarConnor, Josh at 2RedJEarl, Eustachio at EVR1022, and of course Red Team Scouting at Red Team Scouting. For the Red Team Draft Podcast, I'm your host, Alex West, and we will see you next week.